The flute is an item in the very first Zelda game that's meant to help you defeat bosses and teleport, but did you know that playing it in the same room as the dragon boss Aquamentus will cause it to shoot more projectiles at you? I'm your host, the Bread Pirate, and if Zelda trivia like that gets you excited, then you came to the right place. Here are 15 retro facts about the original Legend of Zelda, which are still a secret to most people. Number 2. Even though the magic sword is the most powerful sword in the game, it is not the hardest to acquire. That honor goes to the red variant of the starting sword, which you can only acquire by reaching the final dungeon of the game and finding the red ring of power, which changes the color of your tunic and your starting sword to red. But this is an extremely difficult feat because it would force you to play the entire game with the worst sword possible up until the final dungeon, where you would finally find the red ring of power. So don't even bother attempting this, it's just gonna end up being a nightmare. Numero tres. On the subject of color changes, there are actually several other items in the game which will change to match the color of your tunic, such as the raft, the boomerang, the bow, the arrows, as well as a few NPC outfits and the whiskers on these rat creatures. The reason this happens is because the NES can only show 13 colors on screen at a time, and since all of these sprites share the same color slot, they all change color together. Number 4. Speaking of those pesky rats, did you know that their gameplay changes depending on the version of the game you're using? In the original Japanese version of the game, you could kill all of the poles at once by speaking into a built-in microphone on the second controller.
Gone! Oh, it works.
But since the American version of the system did not have a microphone, they changed it so that poles are instead weak to arrows. But there are other versions too. In the Japanese Game Boy Advance release, poles can be defeated by pressing the select button 4 times. In the Nintendo Switch Online release though, you have to press either L and ZL or R and ZR at the same time. And in case you are like me and own one of these things, you can beat the poles by holding the select button. There are even more versions as well, but I just wanted to highlight a few of the more interesting ways that Nintendo has given us to kill poles. Number 5. It's well known that all of the dungeons in Zelda 1 fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. This was done to save memory on the cartridge, but there was actually a mistake made during this process. In an Iwata Asks interview, Toshihiko Nakako explained that after he was given the map of the dungeons, he programmed them into the game only to find that half of the available data was used. Here's how Nakako explains it.
Tezuka-san said, "I did it, and brought this to me. I created the data exactly in line with it, but then Tezuka-san made a mistake and only used half of the data. I said, Tezuka-san, there's only half here. Where did the other half go?" And he was like, "What? Oops, I messed up." But Miyamoto-san said it was fine just like that.
With all of the extra data they had left over, they decided to create a harder difficulty mode for the game, which they called Second Quest, fit with all of its own custom dungeons. To access the Second Quest dungeons, you can use one of 2 methods. Method number 1 is naming your character Zelda. When you boot up the game, you'll have access to all of the new dungeons. Option number 2 is to beat the game 1 time normally. Then the next time you boot up that save file, you'll see a little tiny sword next to your character, meaning you now have access to the Second Quest dungeons. Number 6. Speaking of Second Quest, did you know that you can survive with 0 hearts? In the second quest of the game, you will occasionally find these old men who require you to either sacrifice one of your heart containers permanently or pay a bit of money in order to pass. Normally, if you only have the default 3 hearts, then the game can't really take any more hearts from you. So instead, the old man will injure you, leaving you very, very vulnerable and with no health. Thank you to my IRL friend who tested this fact for me and provided the footage that you are seeing on screen. He promptly died right there. That's the end of him. He didn't survive past then. Goodbye, friend. Number 7. I gotta give credit where credit is due. I did not know about this fact until watching the fascinating video made by NES Complex, which dives into the lore and history of Zelda 1. It is well worth a watch. One thing in the video which surprised me is that in the Japanese version of Zelda 1, the setting for deleting a save file is not called elimination mode like it is in the American version. Instead, it's called kill mode, which is only made more disturbing when you read the opening of the game manual, which reads, Quote, Link does not yet exist. You create Link by first registering your player name. So, there's some nightmare fuel for the next time you delete a save file. Number infinity. Whoops, sorry, that's sideways. A small detail which I love is that there are two versions of the old man. Here they are side by side. The difference is that the old men in dungeons have pointed ears while the overworld men don't. In the lore, this means that the ones on the overworld are humans while the ones in the underworld are Hylians, because Hylians have pointed ears while humans don't. Other subtle differences between the two are that the dungeon old men have slightly bigger beards, they show more of their hands, and their robes are arranged differently, especially in this area. Number 9. Nintendo has never officially confirmed which sword is the one that we see on the title screen, but the most likely candidate is the white sword. The reasons for this are numerous. Both of them share the same color, both of them have a guard that points inwards to protect the hand, unlike the magic sword which points outwards, and both of them are found above waterfalls. In case you don't know, the white sword is actually found by traveling up a waterfall, fighting a Lionel, and then speaking to an old man inside of a cave. And like we see on the title sequence, the sword is physically above a waterfall. On top of that, there are other games which feature the white sword and provide circumstantial evidence. In the Oracle games, you can find a sword with a similar hilt called the Noble Sword, but in Japanese, it's called the White Sword, implying that it's the same blade. And as you can see, it has that classic curved handguard. And in Hyrule Warriors, it seems that the developers were aware of this, since the 8-bit white sword item is only wielded by Princess Zelda, who is a rapier user and only uses swords that have curved handguards. So the white sword is in fact the rapier we see in the title sequence. But that's just a theory. A game theory! I'm gonna miss MatPat. Number 10. Speaking of swords, did you know that the magic sword reappears in the sequel, Zelda 2? We know this because it directly says so in the game's manual, right there. This also means that the magic sword is likely the sword in the title screen of that game. Number 11. In the American version of the game, you can find an item called the Magic Book, which allows you to shoot fire from your wand. But in the Japanese version of the game, it's not called the Magic Book, it is in fact called the Bible. What the heck, my Bible isn't shooting fire or anything, I got ripped off. Also notice that they have the sprite for the book flipped backwards because in Japan, they read their books from back to front, not front to back. Number 12. Here's a fact which is pretty well known, but will be cool for anybody who hasn't heard of it already. The introduction to Ocarina of Time is regarded as one of the greatest in gaming, but the song that plays is kind of random. After all, you don't hear this melody anywhere else in the game. Well, that's because the intro is not a part of Ocarina of Time, it's actually a callback to the original Legend of Zelda flute.
Bonus fact.
When teleporting with the flute in Zelda 1, there is a singular frame in which you can spot fire, which happens right before Link appears on the screen. 13. Before the Rupore existed, there was the door repair charge. Unlike the caves where you can gain rupees, these caves, which are found in Zelda 1, contain moblins and old men who will take money from you for breaking down their door. There are a surprising amount of these door repair locations in the overworld, but most players will never see them, because if you're following a guide online, they're never going to direct you to any of these locations. Number 14. In Zelda 1, there are these enemies called bubbles, which will curse you so that you can no longer use your sword for a short period of time. However, if you want to remove that effect immediately, you can simply play the whistle and you will be cured. Number 15. This might be the last fact on the list, but if you subscribe, then there will be plenty more Zelda videos coming this year. During high school, Koji Kondo, the composer of the music in Zelda 1, was a part of a cover band that played songs from Deep Purple and ELO. But one of the songs from the Deep Purple band seemed to stick with him. Here's a little snippet of one of the songs called April. In case you didn't catch it, that theme you just listened to is identical to that of the dungeon theme in Zelda 1. The song April is pretty crazy because it switches from orchestral music to rock music partway through, so if you're interested in weird songs, then this might be a good one to check out. And that is everything I've got for you today. Make sure you don't stay on your screens for too long, and until I see you next time, have fun storming the castle.